Good morning. Welcome to Friday and Rochester Today. Andy Brownell, News Talk 1340, KROC AM 96.9 FM with Steve Lange from Rochester Magazine, our monthly get-together. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning, Andy.
Anything interesting happening with you over the past month since we last talked?
I'm leaving for a motorcycle trip tomorrow. I think.
You are?
Yeah, I got to get one last, I haven't gotten a trip in this year, so it'll be the last trip on my motorcycle. I'm going to sell that and buy my dad's. My dad is almost 90 and finally selling his motorcycle, so I'm going to buy that. So
you're moving up from the Sportster to real comfort finally.
He's got a Heritage Softail Classic, a 2013, and the Sportster will be for sale. So if anyone's out there looking for a 2006 883 with really good shape,
I would like,
shoot me an email.
I would love to be there when you show off this vehicle and you say, I've ridden this thing all across this entire country, and they're going to look at you like a complete lunatic.
Yeah, no, it's, 36 states I've been in on that motorcycle, so I will miss it, but it is time for a little bit bigger bike for me.
Yeah, the old man needs a more comfortable bike.
It is. I'm getting too old for 400 miles in a Sportster.
So where's the last trip in the Sportster?
So I'm actually going up to a chess tournament in the cities tomorrow morning in Edina. There's a chess tournament, so I'm going to ride up, play in that. Stay in Edina, meet a buddy of mine. Actually, you might remember him, Elliot Mann. He was a reporter from the PB. Elliot, great guy. Yeah. Then I'm heading to Alexandria and over in that area. So doing the kind of northwestern Minnesota trip. So
okay, you're not going off to hurricane country or anything like that.
No, it's going to be a little bit cold for the long rides. I'm looking at tomorrow it's supposed to be a high of 55 or something. So.
I think you're being pessimistic. Summer's going to last forever.
Okay, well, then I'll go farther probably.
All right. The cover this month is your fashion cover, so I almost ignored it. Sorry.
Right. No, I know that's not your jam.
That's tradition for me.
No, it's a beautiful photo shoot, though, and again, nothing I get involved with because clearly I'm not the person to play a role in this, but Olive Juice Studios and Tessa Olive, our ad director here, do a phenomenal job, and just a really, Abby Smith did the writing on it. She's a current model from Rochester. So just a really cool piece, beautiful photos, lots of local shops and fall fashion, but yeah, I know it's not something you're looking forward to every year.
Well, I guess the one thing that intrigues me is where do you get the models? Do people volunteer or?
We have done it in many different ways, and now the most effective way we've found is each store who is part of this, they find their own model. So sometimes it's someone who works at the store or their face of the store or somebody who works there. So that's been really cool for us, and they do a great job of finding models and then their own clothes and pair it all together. And we had a phenomenal location at Mayowood Stone Barn, so that was made for a really cool backdrop.
My other question, the background looks fantastic with the barn.
And every time, wherever we're going to shoot, I think I wrote about it in this issue somewhere, but wherever we're going to shoot, we ask people, and they're always unbelievably accommodating, and Mayowood Stone Barn was no exception. So the Powers group over there, as soon as we asked, they set up a time off hours, and we got to get in there and shoot, and they gave us full access. And we just had our best of the best post-bulletin event there last week, a couple weeks ago, and it's a phenomenal venue.
Yeah, I've been there for several events. It's a neat piece of Rochester history, too, so it's pretty cool that it's being utilized.
And really well apportioned. I mean, just everything in there that we've had a couple events there, and they've been awesome.
Well, I'll tell you what, we'll take a quick break. We'll come back, and we're going to talk about what's not on the cover, which kind of surprised me a little bit because it's the feature story this month, and it's a pretty amazing story of a guy who grew up here in southeastern Minnesota who did, something pretty amazing, but it's more to the story than that's for sure. The man who walked around the world, that's coming up with Steve Lange from Rochester Magazine next on Rochester Today at News Talk 1340, KROC AM and 96.
Paul Trombley.
We're back, Rochester Today, Friday morning with Steve Lange from Rochester Magazine on News Talk 1340, KROC AM 96.9 FM. I teased it before the break, the man who walked around the world. I was aware of this guy. I'd heard his name, and I knew some of the story. But I certainly didn't know all of it. And it's a fantastic read. If you're going to if you're like me, you'll probably be conflicted when you get to the end of the story. But maybe I'll let you explain who David Kunst is and what he did, 50 years ago?
50 years ago last week, right? So in October 5th of 1974, Dave Kunst completed his 14,000-mile, 20 million step walk around the world. So he left from Waseca, walked east to New York, dipped his foot in the ocean there, flew to Portugal, dipped his foot in the ocean on the west side of Portugal, walked across Europe and as far east as India, which is as far as he could get. He couldn't get through China or Russia at that time. They wouldn't allow him to. Dipped his foot in the water, flew to Australia, walked across Australia, flew to western United States, Los Angeles, walked all the way across Los Angeles and came into Waseca the same way he came out, heading west to east. So it's an amazing story. Along the way, even more stunningly, his brother, who had walked with him, had left with him, was shot and killed by bandits in Afghanistan. This was 2 years and halfway through this trip. They were about 7,000 or 8,000 miles through when his brother got shot and killed by bandits. Dave Kunst got shot in the chest and played dead and was amazingly lucky to survive. And then after recovering at the Mayo Clinic and back in Waseca, he went back with his other brother, Peter, and they completed the trip from Afghanistan, the very point where his brother had been shot and killed, back to the United States. Peter wasn't with him that entire time, but Dave completed the trip. And, the feat is amazing. And at the time, he may very well have been the first verifiable person to have walked across the world, obviously continent to continent like that. So
has anybody else done it?
There's been a few other people who have claims of it, including a few before him, but probably not as verified as his. And I don't know if anyone's done it since he did it, honestly. And I asked him, he lives in California now, and I asked him if someone could do it today. And he actually thought no. He said, the way the world is today with kind of inter-country problems, that someone would have a really hard time doing the same route he did. It was hard. This was 1970 to 74, right? So for him to be able to get through Pakistan, Afghanistan, even India, those were places that were, pretty little known in 1970 compared to today. But
and he almost didn't make it. He was almost killed himself. His brother did lose his life.
Shot in the chest, played dead, had the bandits who had shot and killed his brother come up and literally take his watch off, take his knife from its sheath, lift him up and flip him over, and did not realize that he was still alive. He was holding his breath, trying not to breathe, trying to control his heartbeat. And his brother probably had gotten a second shot point blank that had killed him, or he was probably already dead. But so they did not shoot Dave. They stole, his radio, his belongings, a lot of his clothes, took stuff out of they took a mule with them most of the way that pulled a wagon. And so they took from the wagon all the cooking pots, that sort of thing, left him to die, thought he was dead. He managed to get up and flag down some troops, and they took him to a hospital in Kabul, and he recovered, and then came back to Mayo Clinic and finished his recovery there. And after a few months of that, went back on the road and went the last 7,000 miles, partially with his other brother, Peter.
And part of the amazing story in Afghanistan is that when he went there, the U.S. Embassy advised him that this is a very dangerous thing you're going to do. There's lawlessness in the hinterlands, and I imagine you'd find lawlessness in the hinterlands of Afghanistan today as well. But he had a military escort up to a point, but then they indicated, well, we got you through the worst part of it. You'd probably be okay now. And it was almost immediately after that the attack occurred.
When he crossed, and he was actually more fearful. They were in Pakistan, and then they wanted to get into Afghanistan. They thought that was safer. But as they crossed the border, they were handed a note from the American embassy, who knew they were coming, it said, make no mistake, you are in danger in this country. The people in this country will kill you for your possessions. So he knew they knew they were in some danger. And yeah, they had Afghani soldiers, 2 of them assigned to them. And they escorted them for 2 straight weeks through what they thought was by far the worst part of Afghanistan. And when they reached Kabul, the bigger city, the escorts thought they'd passed the most dangerous stretch and they left. And that was kind of what they were designed, what the plan was from the beginning. And then in October of 72, they were setting up camp with their mule and their wagon and saw a half dozen people in the distance kind of scoping things out, and they knew they were in real trouble. He had a shotgun. He fired a shot up in the air to try to scare him away and thought that did. The guys kind of backed back into the darkness, and then a few minutes later heard a shot ring out, and he got shot in the chest and heard a couple more shots and, was telling his brother to play dead, and then heard his brother was about 20 or 30 feet away from him, heard the bandits come up as he was playing dead and heard another shot 20 or 30 feet away, probably where his brother was lying. And that was it, right? And then the bandits didn't bother to shoot him, and he played dead well enough to get away with it, and managed to not bleed out through the night, and managed to track down some people on the road, and managed to get a ride to Kabul, and managed to find a doctor who could fix him up. So it was just a pretty amazing turn of events, and nothing, I guess, that was too surprising. He knew they were in danger. His brother's journals made it clear that his brother knew they were in danger. But they decided to press on, and unfortunately that's how it ended for his brother John.
It's horrible. And then his survival miraculous. And then to have the resolve to go back there and continue on after going through a horrible tragedy and trauma like that. But I guess I want to go back to the beginning. Did he tell you where does this come from? Hey, I'm going to walk around the world.
So that part was pretty amazing, right? He had a big adventure, a big adventurous spirit. His mother had an adventurous spirit. He grew up in Caledonia, Waseca area. And honestly, he's very forthcoming in the book to a point that will really, to his credit and discredit, in his biography and in his speeches he has recorded and in his interviews he gives, he was sick of being in a little town. He was sick of being married. He was sick of being a dad, and he wanted to have a reason to take off. And so he was going to drive to or walk. He wasn't sure. He was going to this tip of South America. He was going to go across Australia. It was right after the moon landing, right? And he really wanted to find an adventure that kind of matched that spirit of 1969. He was working in his part-time job in the Waseca bowling alley, and a buddy in there said, hey, you should walk around the world. And he said, well, my feet will get wet. Thinking
yeah.
how there's oceans. And the buddy said, no, look, I planned this out. Here's what you do. You walk across every continent. You fly to the next continent or take a boat, and then you walk across that continent. So you've, for all intents and purposes, walked around the non-water parts of the earth.
Yeah, where you actually can walk.
And so he right away was like, I'm going to do this. And that was it. They met with former Vice President Hubert Humphrey, soon to be U.S. Senator Hubert Humphrey then, and got a letter of recommendation from Humphrey. Brilliantly, they got a scroll from their mayor so that other people could sign the scroll, and that turned out to be a brilliant PR move, because you come into town and find the leader of that community in whatever country he's in and say, hey, can you sign this and stamp it with your seal, and you get to be part of this walk? And it was this beautiful scroll they had. And that opened a lot of doors. And then someone told them they should take a mule with them when they left Waseca, and they thought that was dumb at first, but it turned out to be a brilliant PR move, because these weren't just any hitchhikers now. There were 2 guys with a mule and a eventually a UNICEF marked wagon behind the mule, so that gave them some credibility as well. And they took off walking. I mean, it was crazy. They were in Rochester in like day 3, and they'd never walked more than a handful of miles in their life at one point. So
I like that when he says, I tried it out. I walked for about 5 miles, and I said, yeah, I can do this.
Yes, and that was it. So then from that point on, they were making, 15 miles a day. They talked about being exhausted and coming into maybe Owatonna or something on the first night and camping in some park in Owatonna, and then coming into Rochester in the pouring rain and finding somebody they knew here who put them up for the night and And so it went. And once the story kind of gained some steam, people were waiting for him from town to town to take him in, to give him meals, to buy him beers. And that kind of catapulted him across the world, because now everyone in the next town knew they were coming.
And he wasn't a kid when he started this off. He was, he had children. He was married. I think it said he was born in like 1939.
He was 32 at the time, so he was born in 49.
Oh, 49, okay.
Right? No. He was 39. You're right. He left in 72. He was 30. He was 31. He left in 70. You're right. He was born in 39. So he was like 31 or 32 when they finally left. And his brother, was 23 when they left. His brother had just graduated college, and he asked his brother, and his brother said, "Look, I graduated on like June 15th. Can we leave on June 20th?" And they said, "Sure, let's do that." They had $1,500 or so. He kind of cashed out his 401k, some of it, and his savings, and they thought that would last them. They thought they might work part-time and get a lot of handouts, and they did. I mean, they by the time they got to New York, they had only spent $100. Everyone along the way had taken them in, seen their sign, asked them what they were doing, and couldn't wait to put them up.
Did he ever share how much money they raised for UNICEF through this?
Not a whole lot, honestly. So it was hard in those days to determine how money was coming in for UNICEF. We know that there were $3,000 or $5,000 that came into the local UNICEF group that had specific tags to the brothers. It was probably more of it was his brother's idea. Actually, Dave didn't have a whole lot of interest in repping it as any sort of fundraising thing, but his brother thought that'd be a good way to do it and get some credibility. So the UNICEF people have always been kind of coy about how much money they raised, but it was also a promotion for UNICEF, and they had that painted on the side of their kind of small covered wagon that their mule pulled.
It is neat, the photograph at the very start of the article has him with the mule. Willie Make It is the name of the Willie and Make It.
Yes.
And then the two soldiers marching alongside him. And I take this that was after his brother's death, because he's alone in the photo. And he's wearing very much early 1970s clothing, that's for sure.
And that was pretty wild because, there weren't a lot of straight up hiking boots in the 1970s, right? So these guys tried every type of shoe, and they went through about 20 pairs of shoes. So about 1 million steps per pair of shoes, which I kind of was doing the math. That probably makes sense for me too. But, they, before
Have you ever done 1 million steps?
Well, so 5,000 steps a day, you need, 2 is 10,000, 20 is 100, 200. So, a year of walking every day, my shoes would last probably a year. So that makes some sense. But he said there's a pair of Red Wing boots that he really loved. But, you see he's wearing like kind of what would have been like leather dress boots sort of from the 70s. But, and just amazing that they didn't get really, besides being shot. He had no major injuries that set him back. He's walking alone at this point through Iran, and I think his brother Peter had walked with him some, then he would leave and head back to California and then come back and meet him at different stretches. So, at this point he's being accompanied by a pair of Iranian soldiers in 1972 after his brother had been killed, and now he's making his way through Iran.
Okay. It's this incredible story of hardship, survival, persistence. He gets all the way to the United States, and the story takes a twist. And by the end of the story, to be honest with you, I don't like the guy at all.
No,
I couldn't believe it.
It was a hard story to write because of this, and I knew the story. I knew this going in, but when I started really diving into it, I read his autobiography. I watched a ton of the interviews he's recorded. I, read dozens and dozens, maybe 100 stories about the guy, and you're hoping this part was overplayed, and it probably wasn't. So I've actually had a few people complain to me that, I should have written the story because of how this guy's attitude is. I couldn't write the story and not talk about his attitude, and there was no reason to write just about his attitude. This guy walked around the world. So that, for one thing, is an amazing feat.
It's an amazing story, regardless.
In 1974, he's about 5 days, not even, maybe a little bit more, from getting back to Waseca. People are fired up, right? There's big parties scheduled. They're going to have a big deal in Waseca. They're making plaques for him. The city council, all of that is excited. Warren Wolf, who's a really good reporter from the Minnesota, I think they were called the Tribune at the time, walks with Dave for a few days while interviewing him, and then publishes a profile of Kunst in the Tribune. And in that profile, Dave Kunst just lays bare his real thoughts about life, the trip, Waseca, his wife, talks about the sexual adventures he'd had along the way and the women he'd slept with. And it really kind of changed everything. They published that story in September 22nd of 1974. And Dave says in the story, I got an ego as big as they come. And he talks about how small the people of Waseca are, how he'd never seen so many ignorant people in his life, referring to the foreigners he dealt with along the way.
Who fed him and took him in.
And then you think, okay, maybe this is just kind of the ramblings of someone who's, walked 20 million steps. But then he publishes his book later, and I'm kind of jumping ahead, but later he publishes his autobiography, and he reruns this story that Warren Wolf wrote, which has all of these kind of damning things Dave says. And at the end of the story in his book, he says, I love it. Finally, someone's written down what I think about things. So he just absolutely doubled down on what was going to derail his PR career. So back in Waseca, they're planning this big party for him in a couple of weeks, and now they're saying, we don't even want to celebrate this guy. He's ripping on us. He's talking about people sitting at the bar and what losers they are in Waseca. He's talking about how much he can't wait to get away from his wife and his kids. His wife, at least, maybe not his kids. But that throws the Waseca Chamber of Commerce into disarray. They don't want to promote this, and they actually change the focus of the event to be on the completion of the walk, but not on Dave Kunst's ideals. It's just how they phrased it. So, and his wife is really, distraught. She just was made out to be someone that he was going to walk back to, but wasn't going to stay with. She said, I just can't understand why he ruined everything so close to the end of it. And he really did. I mean, it's just, it's hard to get your head around why he would do this. At the same token, I've talked to the guy. I get this is just his personality. He wasn't going to pretend to be something else. So, at some level, you can appreciate the guy's honesty. But at another level, you're just stunned that this was his take. And that B, they bothered to make this take public. He lost book deals. He probably lost movie deals. He lost sponsorships that were coming from Waseca. So, just the local community really fell hard on him. And then the national community kind of followed suit. So it was just, it was a terrible end to what could have been a great story. But also a lot of it came to fruition in other ways. So he'd met a woman in Australia while he was married, and I'm not going to judge what people's relationships are like. I have no idea. But he met a woman in Australia that he ended up marrying. So he came back here, divorced his wife, married a woman he'd met on the walk. So, I don't know. It's too bad. The story would have been a great, moving, inspirational story. Instead, it kind of turned into a story that collapsed upon itself.
So the lesson learned is if you're going to do a walk around the world, be sure to get a good publicist before you take off.
And, maybe be a little bit more open to realizing the good of what you've just done instead of focusing on the bad. So, you know what? This guy could have said, look, I had this attitude going in, and I found that, because he talks a lot about how beautiful people were to him too. So it's not like he doesn't understand that. He clearly does. But he didn't care. And at some level, I appreciate sincerity, right? More than anything. But boy, this was a rough way to end it. And it really put a damper on what could have been a great tour. And even then, he was going to speak at schools and stuff and getting paid for giving these speeches, and people were reticent to hire him because, you got a guy whose ideals don't jibe with what you want them to be. Man, it was rough to write about. And like I said, I've had a few people, including one woman, who really kind of railed me for doing this and for, mentioning this part of it. I said I couldn't in good conscience write the story and not talk about this. So, it is why it's probably not popular now. It is why there was never a movie made. It is why his book didn't sell well. I mean, it does play a big role in the story, and it's too bad because this guy walked around the world. He picked up on the spot where his brother was shot and killed and where he was shot to continue his walk around the world. It's an amazing inspirational story when it comes to the physical fortitude of the whole thing. But boy, and he didn't care. He was getting threats when he was coming back into Waseca that people were going to try to stop him from coming into town, that a bunch of the Waseca people were going to, protest. And he came in and stomped his foot on that spot where he had walked out on, and he did it. He walked around the world.
It's an amazing read, and I enjoyed it. But like I say, it's a conflicting story, and I guess maybe that makes it even better as a story being told, how complex it is.
It does, but boy, what a feat to go, relatively unnoticed. I didn't know about the story. I know you said you had. I'd never heard about it until I started doing. I didn't even know how it started. I ran across. I think I was just searching like people walked around the world, and they said the first guy was from the first verified. Guinness had acknowledged him as the first person to walk around the world in a verified way. You know what? I think I saw this like in one of the Guinness cartoons. It was like, did you know, first guy to walk around the world type thing. And I was like, what in the world? This guy's from southeastern Minnesota. And then started diving into the story, pulled the PB archives, got a chance. He doesn't give interviews anymore because he doesn't talk on the phone. He's pretty old now. So
he's 84, I think.
84, but still lives in California, still walks some. Still, he's a respected member of the community, gives back a lot there, he's still married to the woman he met in Australia. I mostly dealt with him through emails, and then he would, send me along to interviews he'd given, like he'd recorded for himself on YouTube.
Sure.
And that's how I did a lot of the research directly from him. So, which is unfortunate as well, because there's a lot of stories about him, and a lot of it uses the same source material because he's only given like a couple 1-hour interviews or actually longer, that he recorded. So he sends people back to there. So you're getting a lot of the same info, but, the trip is as verified as a trip like this gets. There were certainly long stretches where people didn't see him and people questioned whether he was riding in the car in Australia. I can't find anything to support that. I think this guy walked around the world. I think he was that determined. I think he was that stubborn. And I think he had that kind of fortitude.
It's a good read. Pick up the magazine and check it out. The story of David Kunst. Steve Lange from Rochester Magazine with us. We'll be back after a quick news break with more Rochester Today on News Talk 1340, KROC AM and 96
News app.
Good morning. Welcome back. Rochester Today, Friday morning with Steve Lange, Rochester Magazine. I'm Andy Brownell, and this is News Talk 1340, KROC AM and 96.9 FM. Well, I guess shift gears considerably from a global epic to local restaurants that make good sushi. And I'll be honest, total disclosure here, I don't think there is such a thing as good sushi. So there.
I'm kind of torn. I think when I get good sushi, I really appreciate how good it is. It's just not really my jam. But this was one, the best sushi, which we had readers vote on in our best of. And this is one of our spinoffs from that. So I wanted to run the story. Actually, the photographer did, because the sushi photos are amazing. So they make sushi look so elegant and artistic. And every one of these places did. Yep. So Crave, which I love for other things. Uturi Sushi, again, love for other things. All these restaurants. I think if you make sushi well, you probably make a lot of things well. It's one that takes that kind of care. Ichi Tokyo, Wabi Sabi, Kumo Sushi, and Zen Fusion, which we like as well. So just 6 cool places with unbelievable photos of their, honestly, it's like an artistic dish, the way so many of these are presented.
But it's raw fish.
It is raw fish. Yep, you're right. I can't argue.
And I've had sushi, okay? I'm not one of these people who has not tried it. I have, and it wasn't like it tasted bad, right? I'm not.
No.
But it didn't really have much flavor to it at all. And the explanation I was given, it was not about the tuna or whatever fish you use. It's about the sauces that you dip it in. And I'm like, well, okay, I could dip anything in the sauce. I could cooked meat, and I would have had those flavors. So I know there's people who love it, and to each your own. But I never had the desire to have it again. And that was off of supposedly some of the best tuna you could have had.
Just looking at the pictures, though, I want to go try some of this stuff.
I'm dissing tuna, or dissing the sushi, sorry.
No, I get it. Like I said, I will get it, and I've been with people who love it and want me to try it, and I will, and I've had really good sushi and probably liked it, but it's just nothing that I would normally gravitate toward.
Yeah, it's not that exotic anymore. When it was first introduced here, it was very exotic. It had been a West Coast food for quite a while, and then finally, the middle of the country got sushi probably, 20 years ago.
Honestly, I remember when I first came here, and people were excited because there was like a little sushi stand up in the Galleria on the second floor, like on the food court up there. And I remember people were really excited about that. And I didn't, I was no sushi guy at that point, but I remember trying and it was good. But I remember people being excited to have, at the time, maybe 2 places that were doing good sushi in town.
Exotic seafood. This is a terrible story to tell. I won't name the restaurant, but it was in the Washington, D.C. area. And it was a building that was built in the 1700s that had this restaurant. That was one of the reasons I wanted to go in there. And it was lunch. And I had never had crab before. This is 40-some years ago.
Okay.
So they had crab on the menu, but I didn't know. It was called molted crab. Have you ever heard of this?
No.
Well, it's crab when they're molting, so they're not adult crabs yet. They're
okay.
And in my opinion, it was the most disgusting food I'd ever had in my entire life. And it tasted, like sushi is neutral because the raw fish doesn't have a whole lot of taste. It's all the other things that go with it that have the taste.
Sure.
This tasted horrible.
Huh, never had that.
It was very expensive.
Guess we'll never try it now.
Yeah, don't. I advise you not to have molted crab.
There are people right now who love molted crab.
I'm sure there are.
Furious listening to you talk about this.
What is wrong with that simpleton?
I know. Sorry, it's not all buffalo wings and burger things.
Give me a pizza. All right. We'll have to take a break. Steve Lange's here. We'll be back in a moment. Rochester Today, News Talk 1340, KROC AM at 96.
All Trombley.
We are back. Rochester Today. Friday morning with Steve Lange, Rochester Magazine, News Talk 1340, KROC AM 96.9 FM. Your Oddchester column tugged at the heartstrings again, but it was also very funny at your daughter's expense.
And she gets all the kids whenever they're written about, and my wife reads all the columns, so they all get veto power, and Emma did not veto this one. In fact, she had written about it for a college essay she's doing, so I felt okay writing about this. But in July, Emma came back after a year in Belgium. So she left in August of 2023 and spent a year as part of the Rotary Youth Exchange Program, a phenomenal program. Spent her junior year of high school in Belgium, in the French-speaking region of Belgium, and it was a phenomenal experience. All the highs and lows. You're going to school over there in a school where you don't speak the language, and you're really relying on a lot of people to help you through this. Right? You're a 16-year-old kid leaving, and it was super emotional for us. Emma's our youngest. She actually likes doing stuff with us, so I dropped her off at the airport. We're both trying to hold it together, and she flies over to Belgium, and long flight, all kinds of nerves, and the people meet her at the airport, all kinds of people, her families that she'll be staying with, the Rotary group, friends of those groups, and they want her to go try a Belgian waffle. She takes one bite and throws up on the woman behind her. Right?
It wasn't molted crab, it was a Belgian waffle. They taste pretty good, I think.
And just everything, right? So luckily the woman who she threw up on, that they don't know, is kind enough to scream at her and tell her she needs to buy her a new sweater, that sort of thing. So that's day one, meal one, bite one in Belgium for Emma. And she's telling us that story that night. We can't wait to hear what her first night was like. And she calls us and tells us that story. And Lindy and I, my wife and I, are just, oh man, that is rough. But it's like, it can't get any worse. And not only that, it was one of those moments that made her realize she can get through anything and how much people were going to help her get through anything. So her host mom took her home, everything's fine, don't worry about it. In fact, her host family was sending us photos and stuff the whole first day Emma was there, and there was no mention of anything like this. It was all these amazing pictures, and we're all excited.
We had to clean up the car afterwards.
Yep, so she actually got sick in their car on the drive home as well with the whole family in there. But, it was just one of those, like she said, if I could have gotten back on the plane and just flown back here, I would have done it right then.
Home.
But didn't. And a year later, she has this beautiful essay she wrote about, crying in those first few months, to herself, but that first day after throwing up on people, that first week of school when you're in a Catholic school. We're not Catholic, but that's where she went, in a pretty strict school where they're not speaking English and not very receptive. And, she's talking about crying at those times, just kind of secretly, like, this is rough. And then the kids and parents who helped her along the way, the mom who told her it was okay after the throw up incident, the other host family who stayed with her after she dislocated her shoulder in the emergency room, the 3 girls who asked her to go to lunch after she'd been sitting by herself for 3 or 4 days with no, introduction from the nuns, the Catholic school, just some kid who happens to be here who doesn't seem to speak very well.
Some nice kids.
Some cool kids who made a big difference in the scout group she got into. And then she talks about crying those last few weeks, but because of how moved she'd been by the people who'd helped her there. So yeah, I say in the story, I blatantly plagiarized from Emma's piece, but it's just it was an amazing year, and she saw a lot of amazing things. She got to go to Greece and Sicily with her family, and plenty of pictures in Paris and Brussels. But for her, those things were, far secondary compared to the human relationship she made over there and the people she met and the people who saw the kids sitting by themselves and asked them to go to lunch. And those are the super moving things that I think you learn from an experience like this. And I got to steal some Emma's writing to make it my own.
And you got to be emotional in the end as well.
And it was awesome, right? Because she goes over there and there's all these pictures of, welcome home Emma when she's coming to Belgium. And it's like, man, that is cool from the family. And so we did the same thing when she came back here. We were waiting for her at the airport and she was excited to come back, but, also was going to miss it. But, boy, what an experience for her and what a chance to really get a shot at some kind of international friendships and relationships.
Yeah, I give her a lot of credit. 16 years old, leave home, go across the world.
Oh, my God.
People don't speak your language. Yeah, that's...
If you and I now had to go to a job in Belgium where they didn't speak our language,
right,
day one...
I'm thinking when I'm 16, I would, I don't want to talk to my parents' friends for crying out loud. That's amazing.
And that was it, too. Like, one of the people she really connected with was Nona, who was one of the moms. So every Wednesday they got out of school early and she had to go somewhere and she'd go to this Nona's house. And, Nona's a grandma, and her and Emma crocheted together, made French fries every Wednesday. And I mean, how awesome was that for her to get to spend time with her host grandma, and really appreciate that time over there. It was a great, great series of connections.
Awesome. I wish we had more time to talk about it, but the clock is telling me we have to run.
Awesome.
So thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Look forward to checking in with you next month.
See you, Andy.
Okay. Steve Lange, Rochester Magazine on Rochester Today. Newstalk 1340, KROC AM and 96.